I'm Laura Harris, and I am so thankful to be here today because I get to introduce you to a dear friend of mine and somebody who I think is truly an angel walking this earth. This is Piet Van Waarde, and I say you're an angel walking this earth, Piet, because many people who have your story would have given up on life a long time ago. Your personal story, your medical story, just the history that you have in this life, I don't know if I could have done half of what you did. And somehow you've kept the faith the entire time. So
thank you. That's
before I make Pete cry.
Yeah, no kidding.
Here's how we met. And it's really, really awesome. So my now husband, who was my boyfriend at the time, he knew this guy named Pete. Never used your last name, by the way. And I always thought your name was spelled P-E-T-E because I'd never seen it written down anywhere. And he was like, you got to meet my friend Pete. I said, sure, why not? But Pete lived in Austin and we lived in Dallas. So it took a while for me to meet Pete. And he just told me all these amazing stories about Pete. Pete was pastoring and helping at a church and doing all these amazing things. But one of the things I will never forget, my then boyfriend, my now husband, telling me was that Pete believed in him when nobody else would. And Pete believed in him when he didn't believe in himself anymore. And so, Pete, I just think that the gift that you have, and, you know, it doesn't matter what your religious belief is, but I truly believe that you're a gift from God, and the gift that you have is something that we can all learn from.
Oh, thank you.
But what I've always wondered is, Pete, how the heck did you get here? Because being a pastor, that's something that just in my mind, right? This is just something that I have in my mind, that's something that you start off at a young age thinking, this is what I want to do.
Oh, my goodness.
Was that you?
No.
Oh, no.
So if I'm just totally candid about it, my growing up years, my family was very faithful about going to church, but it was the longest hour of every week. And it felt like, you know, you have your life and then you go into this building and it's like you go back in time, you sing these songs that are very old, and you have the robes and the candles and the stained glass and the sermon that doesn't seem to connect at all to what you're dealing with in life. And it was just an endurance festival for me. And so as soon as I was able to not go anymore, I didn't. And so I had no interest, never imagined becoming a pastor until I had my own life crash. And before we went on the air here, we were talking a little bit about messy youths, and that was certainly mine. And it took me getting to the end of my rope to cry out for help. I had tried a lot of other things to try and sort out my life, and I had a brother who was a very devout Christian who kept telling me, you know, you gotta get your life sorted out with God.
Yeah.
And I was like, that is not the answer.
I'm good on that.
I do not want to do that. But he was so persistent, and he was part of a Bible study, and he finally talked me into going. And I experienced something in that small group of people that showed me a different side of faith. And it was one that, to me at least, felt more genuine, more real, more authentic. And I saw these young people who were like counting on God to help them with all kinds of things, like their studies, their relationship with their parents, their own personal struggles. And they were so open about it. And I thought, wow, if that's what this is about, then I want in.
And when was that?
That was when I was 21 years old.
So you're 21, and do you say to yourself, once you come to this revelation, do you say, I want to be a pastor, or do you just say, I want to help people?
Well, that's a great question. You know, most people, when they talk about their faith journey, and particularly, let's say they want to do something pastoral, they'll talk about like some lightning bolt that came, and I felt called to do this. And I never had that experience. For me, it was much more cerebral. It was like, if God can do this in my life, because it was a radical transformation. I was into drugs. I was into all kinds of stuff. I had been arrested. I mean, it was just like...
Breaking news? Pete, I didn't know this. I always knew that you were like a troubled youth. Who wasn't? Like, oh, you were doing the thing.
Oh, yeah. Totally.
You were doing all the things.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so it was after I had I was on an acid trip, and I had a friend who said to me after a party, and it was at my house, and my apartment, my little one-bedroom apartment. totally trashed after the party. Bong juice on the floor, beer cans strewn everywhere.
Oh, wow.
And I'm sitting on this yellow ragged couch, and my best friend at the time said, Pete, we're always going to live like this. And of course, when you're on acid, it kind of makes you a little philosophic too. And that refrain reverberated in my mind, like, we're always going to live like this. We're always going to live like this. And I'm like, hell no.
I don't want to live
I
like
don't
this.
want to do this. But then I was left with the question, well, what are you going to do? And then my brothers continued, badgering about the Bible study, finally got to me, and that's when I went. And when I went and the life change started happening, I thought, if the gospel can do this for me, why wouldn't I want to spend the rest of my life helping other people experience it? And that was, quote unquote, my calling into the ministry.
That's so beautifully put. But it has to be such a challenge, Pete, because there's so many people like you were at 20 years old who are saying, no, I'm good on that.
Yeah.
They've got church hurt. They're good on God. They don't need that. They can do the outside world all by themselves. How do you keep the faith?
Oh, man. Well, first of all, if you have a real encounter with God where you can look back at your life, and this has been true for me, through all the stuff that I've dealt with in my life. If you have a real encounter with God, you can always look back at that experience and say, you know what? I have questions now that still plague me. We all do. I mean, I don't know, even pastors and theologians who don't have times in their life where they're like, oh, this doesn't seem right, or this doesn't seem like it should be. But if you have a real encounter with God, you can always go back to that moment and say, yeah, but he met me there. And I can't deny the life change that's happened since then. So I'm just going to hold on. I'm just going to keep on.
Yeah. I want to reiterate, though, that it doesn't have to be this catastrophic experience that brings you to God, right? I mean, there's so many people in this life, right, who say, well, I didn't have a troubled youth. I lived a charmed life. I'm just fine. But I find that these ways that we get to where we are right now, everybody has a point where they say, I think that was it.
Yeah.
That was the moment that I had that realization with God.
Absolutely. And I think that's, and I'm so glad you brought that up, because sometimes people will say, well, you have this really great story, right?
Right.
And my story isn't that significant. I didn't go through all of that to find my faith. And I say, the miracle really is that when somebody is at the end of their road and they've tried everything, it's not that hard to say, this isn't working. I need something better. I need something different. But for the person who's able to say, at a certain point, without having to go through all that, to say, you know what, I don't want to do this on my own. And there's enough evidence of the handiwork of God in nature and in circumstance where I'm not going to go to the dead end before I make this decision that life has got to be about something more than what I know.
How do you keep the faith? The word faith is so big. So I love to tell this story. This was just recently, but my husband was helping Jonathan, our little one, understand faith, right? And at 6 years old, you can't believe in something you can't see. You just want to play with Legos. And the whole time he's having this conversation with him, he's doing this number. And Patrick's like, are you listening or are you thinking about going and playing? And he said, I'm thinking about going and playing. But at that young age, he was able to grasp that faith is something that you cannot see.
Yeah.
And that a belief that God will make a way if you just continue on the good path. But Pete, that's hard.
Yeah.
When somebody comes to you, like many people that you know, and they say, I need help. I'm looking at you and I need help. How do they keep the faith? How do you tell them that?
I always go back to this story from the New Testament where Jesus is with his disciples and he says some really hard things. And, that's the thing about Jesus. He was a person who communicated love and grace, but he also challenged people and said, this is the way to go. I am the way, the truth, and the light. And so there were some who said, I'm not sure I can trust you at that level. And so there's the story about many people leaving. And then Jesus turns to his disciples and he says, are you going to leave too? And Peter says, one of the apostles, he says, Lord, what you're saying is really hard, but where else am I going to go? You have the words of life. And that's what I find myself, experiencing when things get hard or things don't get, go as I hope, or I have a cancer diagnosis, which we'll talk about in a bit. You're like, Lord, what? I've been trying to serve you my whole life. Why this, And you say, okay, well, I guess I'm at a crisis of faith. And then you say, well, if I don't do this, what am I going to do? Where am I going to go? What am I going to trust? Am I going to trust myself? I've been down that road before.
And I know where that leads us.
So I just kind of come back to the fact that, it's not a perfect life. It's not one where I understand all that's going on. But I'd rather be here with this than without it.
And we as people need to remember that we're not the only ones dealing with challenges. The church is dealing with challenges right now. What can you say about like the decrease in attendance and the fact that during COVID we were all able to watch it online, right? But now it seems like more people are watching it online while they're helping their kid, while they're doing this, while they're working out.
It's the great next TED Talk, right?
I literally just told you that I was driving to work on Monday and I was listening to a sermon and I was like, wait a minute, I don't think this is how this was supposed to go, because I'm also worried about what's happening on the road,
Yeah.
So how is the church dealing with those challenges? I mean, your brother leads a big church.
Yeah.
I mean, what's that like?
Yeah, so, I always kind of come back to this idea, and it really is related to what we've been talking about thus far, and that is that faith development is hard.
Yeah.
Like,
it's really
if you
hard.
think about our own lives individually, like me still changing, I'm 67 years old, and I still have areas of my life that I'm trying to sort out and trying to get better at. And there's this all internal resistance. I don't want to do this. That's uncomfortable. That's too hard, And that's just me. Now, you take a group of 100 people or 200 people or 1,000 people, and they're all going through that same thing. And you as a leader or as a board of people or a staff are trying to help this group of people voluntarily change their life to do something really hard. And it's like, that's a really challenging assignment. So, when people are critical of the church, I always say, yeah, but is there really a harder assignment in the world? I mean, we could talk about politics, we could talk about education, we could talk about business, we could talk about, any number of things and say, that's a hard job, that's a hard job. But I, having been a pastor, can tell you that there is not a harder job than trying to move a group of people towards voluntary self-change. Now, thankfully, we have the working of the Holy Spirit that helps us in that process, but still, it's tough. So I feel like, yes, the church is in has a challenging assignment, and then you add to that some of the things that are happening culturally, like we talked about COVID. But I think there's also the challenge of what's going on in terms of how the culture is moving further and further away from what used to be, and I don't mean to be like offensive about this, but there were kind of like common sense things.
Yeah.
Like, it's a good thing to go to church.
Yeah.
It's a good thing to stay sober. It's a good thing to, not cheat on your spouse. And everybody kind of agreed with that. And now some of the questions about morality and sobriety and chastity are like being promoted by the culture in diametrically opposed ways than the church is meant to teach. And so you have that challenge. Like, you are truly countercultural now. If you're a devout follower of Jesus, that puts you at odds with a lot of things going on in the culture. So I just say all of that to say that I think that we need to be patient with the church. I think we need to understand the difficulty of the assignment, and then do what we can to be cooperative in its development. Like, each of us have a role. I think one of the things that the Scripture teaches is that we all have a part to play in the body of Christ. And maybe one of the things that I've watched in the church is that we tend to be a little bit more personality driven. We like our leaders, we like our preachers, and we're like, I like to sit back and just take it all in. And we don't necessarily see ourselves as being responsible for helping the church be what it's supposed to be.
Yeah, and you've been doing this for more than 40 years and been doing it with, part of, I hate to say your job, but part of what you do is you do all of this with no judgment. And so how is that possible when the world is changing so fast? I mean, you talk about technology changing, but I just feel like just people.
Yeah.
Just the way we look at stuff is just changing by the minute. I mean, I can talk to you today, and then I turn around and next week, and I'm like, didn't you just say that you don't like bananas? So now you like bananas? Okay. And then it's just like, well, you can't question me. It's like, calm down.
Yeah.
And I just feel like everybody's on edge, so how do you continue to push this idea that there is something better and there is something stronger, even when it doesn't feel like it?
Well, I first of all, I just appreciate your candor and your honesty about all this.
Like, I don't know. I just feel like even me, like you asked me if I like water today, and tomorrow I'll say, no, thanks, I'm trying to quit.
Well, I think that part of, the challenge for all of us is to do life honestly.
Ooh.
And to have people that can speak into your life and help hold you accountable. And if I have one critique of the church, and I think maybe it's because it's my personal passion, is the lower personalization of ministry, if that makes sense. So we do a lot of things in groups, and just like sometimes in business, we are trying to scale things so that we can get be more efficient, more effective with, let's say, discipleship or developing Christ followers. So what program can we create? What service can we have? And I think for a lot of us, it's about a more personalized walk. So, we hear in the church a lot about, strong leadership and strong preaching. And I believe in that. But part of my calling as a pastor is to personalize the journey, to walk with people through the thick and thin, not just give them a book, not just give them a tape or a podcast, or not just say, hey, come to church with me. It's about saying, I'm willing to walk with you through the hard, through the doubts, through the points of frustration. And maybe as we walk together, there'll be times when I give you something, but there's also going to be times where you're going to, in return, say, hey, Pete, what's going on? And so I think it's that kind of community, that kind of relationship, that kind of personalization of the gospel that is a real passion of mine. And it's part of what I hope to be about for the rest of my life.
Well, you're retired, but you're semi-retired. I mean, he married me 10 months ago, December of 2023. Yeah. So I'm just trying to wrap my brain around you being semi-retired. You're like Oprah. You still have all these jobs. Like he's still sending out text messages and emails and writing books and all these amazing things. But there has to be something at heart. And I think we've touched on it a lot here, but there has to be something that you feel like is unfinished.
Yes. Well, and it is because of, 5 years ago, I got a cancer diagnosis. And it started off with bladder cancer, and then it progressed to prostate cancer. Then they found tumors in my kidney and my lymph nodes. And so I had a surgery just 5 months ago, and they took it all out. And that process over the last 5 years has introduced me to a whole new community of people who, first of all, are just heroes and warriors. If you know somebody who's got cancer, they're probably a fighter, and it's tough because it's such a roller coaster. You get good news, you get bad news, you get good news, and then more bad news. And so part of what I want to do in terms of this personalization that we're just talking about is I want to try and walk with cancer patients and their families and their support network and provide what I'm calling encouragement and hope for the battle. And I don't know exactly what that looks like all the time. It involves, like you already suggested, it involves prayer. So I send out a prayer text called the Pocket Prayer every morning to a group of people. I do a podcast called Sidewalk Conversations where I'm talking to cancer patients. I have a newsletter, and I'm now working on a book called Keep on Healing. So I feel like this next chapter of my life is really about trying to be a voice of encouragement and hope to people who really need it.
And you could have just said, I beat cancer, and so I'm good on that, and I'm going to Disney World. But you have decided that it's now your mission, even though 6 years ago, before you were diagnosed with cancer, you didn't even know that was going to be your mission in 6 years. So now that you're here, I just see the joy in your face to be able to be that blessing to others who are dealing with what you and your family were dealing with.
Yeah, well, I think I have to say, and this might sound odd at first, but I have to say it's almost selfish for me to do it because it's part of how I see God redeeming the struggle. So when you're in a really difficult place, whether it's health or finances or personal struggles, relationships, all you can do sometimes is look inside and say, woe is me, and rightly so. I mean, it's horrible. Mm-hmm. But if you can add to the lament a component that says, I want to use some of this pain and some of the help I receive in the midst of the pain and share that with other people, it makes what you're dealing with a little less difficult. And it actually redeems the suffering. So there's a passage in 2 Corinthians chapter 1 where Paul talks about taking the comfort that you yourself have received and drawing from that comfort to comfort others. And that's what this feels like. It's like I have received comfort from my medical team, from my spouse, from my community, and that's filled my soul even in the midst of difficulties. And I want to now draw from that and use this pastoral calling and gifting that I've been given to walk with people and provide the comfort that they might need in this hour. And that just feels really good to me. So, people are always like, so thank you for being helpful. And I'm like, well, thank you for letting me because it's so good for me.
But I also want to underscore that you did not decide to do this after you beat cancer. You have been being this blessing even through cancer. So I want people to understand that, oftentimes people get through and they climb the mountain and they say, I did it, right? And then they're able to help others.
Yeah.
No judgment. That's just the way some people's brains are built. But this love that you have had for other people has been happening even while you were battling cancer, which to me is the most courageous part.
Well, it's interesting you mention that because I had a friend of mine back when I was pastoring in Missouri. And she was one of these people who did not have trouble saying, the hard thing or asking the hard question.
She was blunt.
Yeah. And I loved her for it. And she said, one of my pet peeves with pastors and many Christian leaders is they do exactly what you just said. They go through this trial. They don't tell anybody. They get to the other side and they say, let me tell you what I did.
They shout to the rooftops once it's over.
And they make it sound so simple. It's just these three things. Mm-hmm. She said, I just wish a pastor or a Christian leader would talk about the journey as they're taking it, with all the hardships and, the ups and downs and how you process it. And I'm like, if I'm ever in that place where I'm like in a real deep pile of crap, I'm that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to talk about it as I'm in the journey. And that conversation came back to me with my cancer diagnosis. It was like, okay, now are you going to do that?
Now I got to do that.
You're going to do that, Pete? Really?
Wow.
Because it's hard to do, because you if you're going to do it authentically. There's a lot of people who will say, oh, praise the Lord, God's good to me. And I'm not going to do that. It's like, no, this sucks. And there are really hard days. Mm-hmm. In fact, I have this little practice whenever I get a bad report, is I have a day of lament. So on a number of occasions we got bad reports, and I told Carol, my wife, I said, you know what, I'm going to sit around today, I'm going to sulk, I'm going to eat ice cream. I'm not supposed to eat ice cream, no sugar, I'm going to watch TV, I'm going to complain, and I'm going to journal. That's all I'm doing today. Tomorrow I may have enough energy to kind of get back at it, but I'm going to have a day of lament. And I think there's something really healthy about that. Just to say, because again, I think people, especially in the Christian community, they're just looking for real
That's it.
Just looking for people who like, how can you have faith and do life as it's really happening and have your good days and bad days, and how do you do that with faith? So that's what I want to be at.
Wave a magic wand 10 years from now. What does all this look like?
Well, I hope I'm here. Let's start with that. So with the ministry, if you will, one of the things I want to try and do is I have this book I'm working on called Keep on Healing. I'm committed. So when I was in pastor, let me back up a bit. When I was a pastor of a church, I had the opportunity to lead a fairly significant church in Columbia, Missouri. It was a large church, and we had multiple campuses and so on. And so a lot of my heart ambition was I got to reach as many people as possible. And there's something good about that. I understand that. But I feel like right now it's a little different because I want to walk with individuals and not just talk to a group. And so what I'm just praying for is, Lord, give me a group of people, and I'll let you determine how big that is, that I can actually walk with personally. So when I do my pocket prayers in the morning, people are always surprised that I send them out one at a time because they think, well, you must have some program or something. I'm like, no.
I always thought that.
I'm like,
and then my husband's like, no, he's sending them one at a time.
Yeah. So I want to pray for people as I do it. Right? So, Lord, bless Patrick, bless Laura, bless whoever. I want that personal. I don't want to lose that. So I want to be able to say, I provide resources for a larger group, whoever needs it, but I'm also very committed over this next 10-year run to walk with individuals who are in this space, because I think that's what it takes. To be really helpful, it takes a friend, a pastor, a person who gets it because I'm in it, but who also has maybe some gifting to not be stupid and weird and say dumb things.
But isn't that more ambitious than pastoring a giant church? Because I mean, it's like the giant church is build it and they will come. Well, now you're looking for individuals who you can reach individually, one by one by one. That seems like a daunting task. Not to be negative, Nancy, but you got a lot of work to do.
True, and I try and stay humble about that. But I do feel like if God is leading this process, and I don't mean to be hyper spiritual about this, but if God is leading this process, then I think the right people are going to come at the right time, and I'll be a part of some people's lives, maybe for a season, like just, hey, a couple phone calls or texts or something. But then there are some people that I'm going to walk with a little longer. And I really am okay with that. And I'm just trusting that as things develop, I'll know what to do when it comes. And hopefully God's with me.
And you will be, just because that's the way you've kind of structured your life now, right? I think one of my favorite things about you, Piet, is that you find the good while also being real about it. Like you're not the type of person to say, Laura, you're so good at that. Laura, you're so amazing. Laura, I'm so glad that you're here. These are all great things. But Piet, if I were to I think what's great about you is you give that praise, but at the same time, you're like, okay, so we know that this is not where we want to be. Yeah. So here's where we want to be. And you give people actionable items. Piet did our premarital counseling, my husband and I. And one of the greatest things about it was that I felt like I was talking to a human being. I didn't feel like you were talking down to us. Like, these are the things you're not going to do. These are the things that you're supposed to do. Because what human being can live their life like that? Right. It's already a daunting task to go into a relationship with someone that cannot be broken. So to have someone telling you, this is what you cannot do. Do not do this. Make sure you don't do this. Yeah. It was more, Piet, like you were giving us a manual, if you will, because you've lived it. Yeah. So if people want to live it with you, how can they keep up with you? Because there's lots to do.
Well, I have a couple of social media channels. So I'm on YouTube, and I put a lot of videos on YouTube. I also have an Instagram account, which I just have started I'm doing a series of what we call lifestyle videos, where I just take snippets of what I'm doing as part of my life, whether it's my exercise and diet routines or my prayer disciplines or even just like some things I'm thinking about as I walk through this journey. So we do that on Instagram. And then I have a Facebook group called Keep On Healing that people can become a part of. And I like that because that's also interactive and it doesn't matter where you are. You can kind of interact with it. And then I have a newsletter that I produce every week where I tell other people's stories, which is part of what I love to do. Is, it's like one thing if people know my story, but if they can hear other people's stories and what they're doing to survive and stay positive, I think that's really helpful. So it's called The Healing Chronicle, and people can sign up for that. So there are a variety of things, but pietvanwaarde.com is my website, and most of those resources can be accessed through that.
In a world full of people with very little attention span, if somebody has made it all the way through this conversation, they really do like you. I just want you to know that. They really do. Like I always say, man, if somebody can watch me for more than 10 minutes, I've done my job for the day. But that said, Pete, that means they want more in a life where everything has to happen so fast. Yeah. What would you want somebody to take away from this conversation? If there's one thing that they remember from all of the things and all the amazing nuggets that we had today, what would you hope they walked away with?
Well, I want to talk to the camera right now. If you're watching and you're struggling, I just want you to know two things. You are not alone. There is a God who cares about you. It doesn't matter if you've had previous experiences with church or religious people. That is not who you need to focus on. God is with you. He is for you, and he's walking with you whether or not you realize it. And then secondly, if you need some encouragement and support, particularly in the case of cancer, or if you have a loved one who's dealing with cancer, you might need a pastor. Not somebody who's a preacher, not somebody who's going to tell you what you shouldn't do, or but if you need somebody who will walk with you, I hope you'll reach out because I'd love to do that.